If evil had a face, it wouldn't look like Ted Bundy. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't sound dangerous. He didn't raise his voice. He was intelligent, well-spoken, handsome. The kind of man your parents would trust. The kind of man your friends would feel safe around. The kind of man people described as nice. He studied law. He talked about justice. He volunteered on political campaigns. He blended in perfectly. Ted Bundy knew how people think. He knew how to listen. He knew how to mirror what others wanted to see. He smiled at the right moments. He spoke softly. He made people feel important. Women trusted him. Strangers helped him. Doors opened for him because he didn't look dangerous. And that was the most dangerous thing about him. Behind that charm was something else, something controlled, something calculated, something disturbingly calm. At least 30 people would never come home again, not because they ignored warning signs, but because there were none. No mask, no monster face, no obvious threat. Just a man who understood people better than they understood him. This is not a story about violence. It's a story about deception, about how evil doesn't always shout. It doesn't always chase. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it smiles. And long before the world learned his name, he was already hiding in plain sight. Ted Bundy was born in 1946, but from the very beginning, his life was missing something most people never question: stability. There was no clear father figure, no consistent explanation of where he came from, no steady emotional ground to stand on. As a child, Ted believed one simple truth: that the woman who raised him was his mother, that the family he lived with was his real family. For years, that belief shaped his sense of safety. It shaped his understanding of who he was, until it didn't. Because the woman he called mom was not his mother at all. She was his grandmother. And the woman he believed was his sister was actually his biological mother. There was no calm conversation, no careful moment of honesty. The truth surfaced later, quietly, gradually. And when Ted finally understood what had been hidden from him, something fundamental shifted inside his mind. Identity is not just about blood, it's psychological. It's the internal narrative that answers the question, who am I and where do I belong? For Ted Bundy, that narrative collapsed. Psychologists describe experiences like this as an identity fracture, a moment when the self splits between who you believed you were and who you suddenly realize you might be. For a developing child, that fracture doesn't simply pass, it lingers. It introduces doubt at the deepest level. If the people closest to you can lie, what else in your life is false? If your origin story isn't real, can you trust your own memories? Reality itself begins to feel unstable. Outwardly, Ted adapted. He did not rebel loudly. He did not break down emotionally. Instead, he became quiet, observant, highly intelligent. Teachers noticed his sharp mind. Classmates noticed his calm presence. Nothing about him seemed chaotic. But inside, a different transformation was taking place. Not confusion, but control. Ted Bundy learned something early in life: that emotions could be hidden, that pain didn't need to be expressed, that anger could be buried beneath composure. What formed inside him was not explosive rage, but hidden rage, cold, contained, unspoken. A type of anger that doesn't shout, it waits. He began watching people closely, how they spoke, how they reacted, how easily they trusted. He studied social dynamics the way others study textbooks. He learned what made people feel comfortable, what made them open up, what made them believe, and he learned how to mirror it. Different versions of himself for different environments. One personality for school, another for friends, another for authority figures. Over time, those versions became more familiar than any authentic sense of self. There was no dramatic warning sign, no visible instability, no obvious emotional disturbance. Friends saw ambition. Teachers saw discipline. Strangers saw charm. But underneath it all was a growing emotional detachment. Ted Bundy did not feel anchored to a stable identity. And when identity feels unstable, the mind looks for substitutes. Some people find achievement. Some seek validation. Some chase belonging. Ted Bundy gravitated toward control. Control felt grounding. Control felt safe. It offered certainty in a life that had begun with deception. By the time he reached adulthood, Ted Bundy was no longer searching for himself. He was constructing himself, carefully, deliberately. A personality built not on truth, but on performance. And the most dangerous part was how well that performance worked. Because to the outside world, Ted Bundy appeared confident, composed, whole. But internally, he was still responding to the same silent wound formed years earlier. A fracture that never healed. A sense that his identity was flexible and that reality could be shaped if you understood people well enough. And when a person believes identity is something you can wear, remove, and replace at will, the question is no longer who they are. The question becomes, what are they capable of becoming? By the time Ted Bundy entered adulthood, he had learned one thing better than most people ever will: how to appear normal. Not average, not forgettable, but trustworthy. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, often doing things that made people feel safe around him. Ted Bundy volunteered in political campaigns. He knocked on doors, shook hands, talked about values, justice, and community. He spoke confidently, listened carefully, remembered names. People described him as thoughtful, engaged, sincere. Later, he worked at a suicide hotline, a place built entirely on trust, on listening, on empathy, on calming voices in moments of crisis. He talked people through their darkest thoughts, helped them feel heard, helped them feel less alone. To the people around him, this wasn't suspicious. It was admirable. Friends would later say the same thing again and again. He was kind. He listened. He cared. And that's what makes this part so unsettling. Because Ted Bundy didn't just pretend to be good. He understood goodness. He understood how compassion sounds, how concern looks, how patience feels to someone on the other end of a conversation. He wasn't guessing. He was studying. This was the mask, and it was flawless. Ted Bundy learned how to mirror people emotionally. If someone was anxious, he became calm. If someone needed reassurance, he offered understanding. If someone wanted to feel important, he gave them attention. And slowly, people began to lower their guard. Not because they were careless, but because everything about him signaled safety. This is the question Americans obsess over. How did no one see it? The answer is uncomfortable, because there was nothing obvious to see. Ted Bundy didn't act out. He didn't isolate himself. He didn't behave erratically. He integrated perfectly. He moved through social spaces with ease. Around friends, he was polite. Around authority figures, he was respectful. Around strangers, he was charming. And around vulnerable people, he was attentive. This wasn't random, it was adaptive. Ted Bundy had learned early in life that identity could be adjusted, that personality could be performed. And now he was using that skill at full capacity. Psychologically, this is where the danger deepens, because Ted Bundy didn't feel fake to others, and over time, he didn't feel fake to himself. The mask stopped feeling like a disguise. It became a tool, a way to navigate the world, a way to control outcomes, a way to avoid suspicion entirely. People didn't question him because he made questioning feel unnecessary. And that's the terrifying part. Not that he fooled everyone, but that he made people feel foolish for even considering doubt. There were moments, later remembered, that seemed slightly off. A comment that lingered too long. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But nothing concrete, nothing actionable. And human beings don't accuse without evidence. We trust patterns. And Ted Bundy's pattern was kindness. This is how predators survive in modern society, not through force, but through familiarity. Not through fear, but through reassurance. Ted Bundy wasn't hiding who he was. He was hiding behind who people wanted him to be. And the more he succeeded, the stronger the mask became. Because every moment of trust reinforced the idea that it was working, that no one could see through it, that he was untouchable. By the end of this phase of his life, Ted Bundy wasn't just wearing a mask, he believed in it. And when someone believes deeply enough in the version of themselves the world applauds, the line between performance and reality disappears, which leads to the most disturbing truth of all. Ted Bundy didn't look like a monster because he wasn't trying to hide one. He was trying to perfect the opposite. And that's why for so long, no one saw it coming. At some point, the mask stopped being enough. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. Ted Bundy had learned how to move through the world without resistance. People trusted him. People helped him. People believed him. And slowly that trust stopped feeling accidental. It started to feel usable. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden transformation. It began quietly, with observation. Ted Bundy started watching people the way a strategist studies a map. He noticed routines, patterns, moments of vulnerability. Who walked alone? Who hesitated? Who was polite enough to stop and listen? This wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate. At first he kept his distance, just watching, just learning. Because escalation doesn't begin with action, it begins with permission. The permission you give yourself to cross a line internally before you ever cross it physically. Ted Bundy understood something crucial. People don't expect danger from someone who looks like they need help. So he created a new version of himself. Not threatening, not dominant, injured, vulnerable. He appeared with a cast, sometimes crutches, sometimes a sling, a visible weakness, a signal, something that quietly said, "I'm harmless." He didn't demand assistance, he asked for it. "Could you help me carry this? Could you walk with me for a moment? Could you do a small favor?" Nothing unreasonable, nothing alarming, and most people said yes. Not because they were naive, but because they were human. This is where trust became a weapon. Ted Bundy didn't force compliance, he invited it. By appealing to empathy, to politeness, to social norms that reward kindness, he understood that saying no often feels worse than saying yes, especially when someone seems injured, especially when the request feels small. This was escalation by design. Each interaction reinforced a belief that people were predictable, that compassion could be triggered, that boundaries were flexible. And with every successful encounter, the line moved. Not dramatically, incrementally. Ted Bundy was testing reality, testing how far he could go before someone resisted, testing how trust could be shaped, guided, redirected. This wasn't about desperation, it was about control. Because control doesn't come from strength alone, it comes from understanding. Understanding how people think, how they hesitate, how they rationalize. Ted Bundy wasn't relying on fear, he was relying on cooperation. And that's what made it so effective. To the outside world, nothing about this behavior looked criminal. A man asking for help, a polite interaction, a moment of kindness. There were no raised voices, no alarms, no visible danger, just ordinary people making ordinary decisions based on trust. But internally, something irreversible was happening. Each step across the line made the next one easier. Each success confirmed a dangerous idea, that rules were negotiable, that boundaries existed only if someone enforced them. And Ted Bundy was learning how rarely they were. Psychologically, this is the point of no return. Not because of what was done, but because of what was learned. That manipulation worked, that empathy could be exploited, that trust could be engineered. The mask was no longer just camouflage, it was leverage. And once trust becomes a tool, it stops being innocent. Ted Bundy didn't wake up one day as something new. He arrived there step by step, quietly, rationally, each action justified by the one before it. And by the time the escalation was complete, he wasn't questioning the behavior anymore. He was refining it, perfecting the approach, adjusting the variables. Because now, he wasn't just blending in, he was directing the interaction. And that shift from participant to manipulator is where everything changes. This is not the story of a sudden break. It's the story of how trust, once weaponized, stops protecting the people who offer it. And by the time Ted Bundy crossed this line, there was no internal resistance left, only momentum. At first, everything had been careful, measured, controlled, calculated, but something began to change. The more Ted Bundy succeeded, the less cautious he became. What once required planning started to feel routine. What once felt risky began to feel familiar. And familiarity breeds confidence. The frequency increased, not dramatically at first, but noticeably. More attempts, more interactions, less hesitation. He no longer needed to rehearse every step. The process felt natural, automatic. Because repetition doesn't just build skill, it rewires perception. Ted Bundy wasn't asking himself, will this work? He was asking, how fast can I do it again? Each success reinforced a dangerous belief, that he understood people completely, that he could predict outcomes, that he was always one step ahead. And with that belief came something else, a sense of immunity. He started taking chances he never would have taken before. Small risks at first, speaking longer, staying visible, relying less on disguise and more on confidence. The cast became optional. The story became simpler, because he didn't think he needed protection anymore. This is where escalation becomes uncontrollable. Not because circumstances change, but because the internal rules disappear. Ted Bundy no longer felt like he was hiding. He felt like he was operating within a system he had mastered. People trusted him. Authorities overlooked him. Society made space for him. And so, he stopped worrying about being noticed. Psychologically, this is called perceived invulnerability, a state where past success distorts future judgment, where the absence of consequences is mistaken for proof of superiority. Ted Bundy didn't believe he was lucky. He believed he was smarter. Smarter than strangers. Smarter than institutions. Smarter than the systems designed to protect people. And once that belief settles in, restraint disappears. He began pushing boundaries more aggressively, not because he had to, but because he could. The mask was still there, but it was no longer doing all the work. Confidence replaced caution. Arrogance replaced fear. He trusted his instincts completely, and instincts unchecked are dangerous things. This is the phase Americans struggle to understand. Why didn't he stop? Why didn't he slow down? Because in his mind, there was no reason to. Nothing bad had happened to him. No serious consequences, no lasting suspicion, no interruption. The world kept responding the way it always had, with trust, with indifference, with silence. And silence can feel like approval. Ted Bundy began to believe that the rules simply didn't apply to him, that he existed outside the normal limits, that he was untouchable. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was moving openly, confidently, as if the outcome was already decided. This wasn't recklessness, it was entitlement, a belief that he deserved control, that he had earned it, that his intelligence justified everything. At this stage, the behavior no longer felt transgressive. It felt normal, necessary, even inevitable. And that's the most dangerous escalation of all. When actions stop feeling wrong, not because they are justified, but because the moral reference point is gone. Ted Bundy wasn't asking himself whether something should be done. He was only deciding how efficiently to do it. And that internal shift is what made the escalation unstoppable. Because now he wasn't testing boundaries. He believed he had erased them. But there's a flaw in every illusion of invincibility. The more confident someone becomes, the more predictable they are, the more visible, the more careless. And even the most convincing mask begins to crack when it's worn without fear. Ted Bundy believed he was untouchable, but that belief, more than anything else, was what ensured he eventually wouldn't be. Eventually, the illusion broke. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough. Ted Bundy was arrested. For the first time, the man who believed he controlled every variable was forced to react. And what followed is the reason his story stands apart from almost every other killer in American history. Ted Bundy didn't collapse under pressure. He didn't panic. He didn't withdraw. He didn't confess. Instead, he leaned in. He chose to represent himself in court, not because it was wise, but because it fed something deeper: control. Standing before judges and attorneys, Ted Bundy spoke confidently. He argued motions, questioned witnesses, quoted legal principles. To many observers, it was unsettling, not because he sounded guilty, but because he sounded competent, calm, composed, engaged. This wasn't a man overwhelmed by consequences. This was a man who still believed the system was something he could navigate, even manipulate. He used the courtroom as a stage, a place to perform intelligence, to project reason, to delay outcomes. And for a while, it worked. Ted Bundy wasn't treated like a typical defendant. He was given latitude, access, trust. And that trust, once again, became an opening. What happened next defies expectation. Ted Bundy escaped, not once, twice. The first escape was almost absurd in its simplicity. He exploited routine, complacency, the assumption that he was contained. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't chaos. It was opportunity. He disappeared, and for days, no one knew where he was. The man everyone believed was finally contained had simply walked away. When he was recaptured, the shock was national. But the story didn't end there, because Ted Bundy escaped again. This time with more planning, more intent. The message was unmistakable. He wasn't just running, he was proving something. That even in custody, even under scrutiny, he could still outthink the system. This is what separates Ted Bundy from nearly every other killer. Not the crimes, not the numbers, but the audacity, the belief that rules were optional, that institutions were slow, predictable, inferior. Most people, when arrested, shrink. Ted Bundy expanded. He treated capture not as defeat, but as another environment to master. Psychologically, this is extreme narcissistic confidence, a conviction that intelligence alone creates immunity, that consequences apply to others, not to you. Each escape reinforced the same belief that had driven him for years, that he was untouchable, that he existed above systems, above limitations, above consequence. And for a terrifying moment in time, it almost seemed true. But every illusion has a cost. The same arrogance that enabled his escapes also ensured his visibility. The system adapted, attention intensified, oversight increased, the margin for error vanished. Ted Bundy didn't lose because he became weaker. He lost because the world finally stopped underestimating him. And that shift, from fascination to vigilance, changed everything. This was no longer a story about a clever individual outmaneuvering institutions. It became a story about how even the most confident manipulator cannot outrun consequence forever. Ted Bundy had escaped custody, but he had also exposed himself. And from that point forward, there would be no more illusions, only reality closing in. Florida changed everything. This was not the world Ted Bundy was used to. This wasn't a courtroom where intelligence impressed people. This wasn't a college town where charm opened doors. This wasn't an environment he understood. For the first time, the mask didn't fit the setting. Ted Bundy arrived in Florida already carrying the weight of national attention. He was no longer anonymous, no longer underestimated, no longer viewed as an interesting anomaly. He was hunted. And more importantly, he knew it. The confidence that once defined him began to erode, not suddenly, but visibly. The charm that had once flowed effortlessly now felt strained, forced. People didn't lean in when he spoke, they leaned away. They didn't see intelligence, they saw danger. This is where control began to slip. Ted Bundy had always relied on one belief, that he could read people better than they could read him. In Florida, that advantage vanished. Law enforcement watched him closely. The public knew his face. The media followed every movement. There was no room left to perform. And without an audience willing to believe, the performance collapses. When he was captured again, there was no shock this time, no disbelief, only relief. The system wasn't fascinated anymore. It was finished. Ted Bundy attempted to return to the strategies that had once protected him. Legal arguments, confidence, control through language. But something fundamental had changed. The courtroom was no longer a stage. It was a verdict waiting to happen. Jurors didn't see a brilliant mind. They saw manipulation. They didn't hear logic. They heard evasion. The charm that once blurred perception now sharpened suspicion. And the public, the same public that once asked, "How did no one see it?" had turned completely. There was no mystery left, only condemnation. Ted Bundy was no longer framed as a complicated figure. He was framed as a warning, a reminder that appearances deceive and that charisma is not character. Psychologically, this was the most devastating phase of his life, not because of confinement, but because of exposure. For years, Ted Bundy had controlled the narrative. Now the narrative controlled him. Every interview, every headline, every courtroom appearance stripped another layer from the mask. And what remained was not impressive. It was small, defensive, desperate. He interrupted proceedings, sought attention, attempted to redirect blame. These weren't signs of confidence, they were signs of collapse. Because when control disappears, narcissistic certainty gives way to panic. The identity he had constructed, the composed, superior observer, could not survive sustained scrutiny. This is where the illusion died. The belief that he was untouchable. The belief that intelligence guaranteed escape. The belief that the system existed to be manipulated. Florida didn't respond to Ted Bundy with curiosity. It responded with finality. And that's why this phase matters so much. Because this is where the myth ends. The charming stranger, the clever manipulator, the man hiding in plain sight, gone. Replaced by something far more ordinary. A defendant, a subject of judgment, a person who could no longer control how he was seen. The mask finally cracked, and once it did, there was no way to repair it. No amount of argument could restore trust. No amount of performance could recreate belief. Ted Bundy wasn't defeated by force. He was defeated by visibility, by a world that stopped projecting intelligence and started recognizing pattern. And when that happened, there was nothing left to hide behind. Only consequence, only reality, and a silence where charm used to be. By the time the trial reached its final phase, something became impossible to ignore. Ted Bundy did not behave like a man facing the end. He was calm, measured, articulate, almost relaxed. He spoke clearly. He chose his words carefully. He maintained eye contact. There was no visible panic, no emotional collapse. And that unsettled people more than anger ever could. Because this didn't look like remorse. It looked like composure. Ted Bundy addressed the court as if it were still a place for debate, as if logic could delay consequence, as if intelligence could still change the outcome. He thanked people, complimented professionals, spoke respectfully to authority, At moments, he even sounded gracious. But listen closely, and something was missing. There was no genuine admission of responsibility, no emotional reckoning, no sense that he understood the weight of what he had done. What he expressed wasn't regret. It was self-awareness, directed inward. This is where psychologists point to narcissism, not the exaggerated kind, but the controlled, intellectual version. A belief that one's own thoughts, one's own perspective, one's own performance deserves center stage. Ted Bundy wasn't speaking to the victims. He was speaking to the audience. And there was an audience. Cameras, reporters, headlines. The trial had become media, and Ted Bundy understood media. He adjusted his tone, his posture, his pacing. Every sentence felt deliberate. Because for someone driven by narcissistic traits, attention is oxygen, and even negative attention is still attention. The courtroom wasn't just a place of judgment, it was the last stage available to him, and he used it. Observers noticed something chilling. When he spoke, he sounded more disappointed about being misunderstood than about the harm he caused, more focused on how history would remember him than on accountability. This wasn't denial, it was reframing. A final attempt to control narrative when control over reality was gone. This is what Americans find so disturbing. Not the volume of words, but their intention. Ted Bundy wanted to be analyzed, interpreted, discussed. He wanted complexity, because complexity feels like power. And simplicity, guilt, consequence, finality, feels like erasure. So he resisted it, not with violence, not with rage, but with performance. The calm voice, the composed demeanor, the illusion of reason. It was the same mask, just worn in a different setting. But this time, it no longer worked. The court wasn't listening for intelligence, it was listening for truth. And truth does not require charm. As the proceedings concluded, Ted Bundy remained composed, almost serene, and that calm became its own statement, not of innocence, but of emotional detachment. The absence of visible remorse did not suggest strength. It suggested emptiness, a disconnect so deep that even the final moments were filtered through self-interest. This is where media obsession meets narcissism, the need to be seen, the need to be remembered, the need to matter, even in infamy. Ted Bundy did not collapse at the end. He performed. And that performance is why his story still unsettles people decades later. Because it forces an uncomfortable realization that evil doesn't always look frantic. It doesn't always beg. It doesn't always break down. Sometimes it speaks calmly, clearly, and without regret. When people talk about this story, they often focus on the ending, on final moments, on punishment, on closure. But closure is not where this story belongs, because the most disturbing part was never how it ended. It was how long it went unnoticed. Ted Bundy didn't look like a monster. He didn't sound like one. He didn't behave the way people expect danger to behave. He volunteered. He listened. He helped. And that's why this story still unsettles people decades later. Not because it's extreme, but because it's familiar. Ted Bundy didn't exist outside society. He existed inside it. In classrooms, in offices, in courtrooms, in everyday conversations. And for years, he was trusted, respected, believed. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It wasn't a failure of warning signs. It was a failure of assumptions. The assumption that danger looks dangerous, that evil announces itself, that we can recognize it instinctively. But this story proves something far more uncomfortable, that intelligence can be a disguise, that kindness can be a performance, that charm can be a tool, and that trust, when given automatically, can be exploited. This is why Americans are still obsessed with this case. Not because of what happened, but because of what it suggests. That the line between normal and dangerous is thinner than we want to believe. Ted Bundy wasn't unique because he was violent. He was unique because he understood people. He understood empathy. He understood social pressure. He understood how badly we want to believe that someone who sounds reasonable must be reasonable. And once you understand that, this story stops being historical. It becomes present. Because the question isn't what happened then. The question is, now. How many times have we trusted someone because they felt familiar? How often have we ignored discomfort because nothing looked wrong? How many warning signs were dismissed because they weren't dramatic enough? This wasn't just a story about Ted Bundy. It was a warning. A warning about how we define safety, about how we confuse confidence with character, about how easily perception replaces truth. Because monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they sit across from us. They hold doors open. They speak calmly. They smile. And that's the most disturbing part of all. So the story doesn't end with punishment. It ends with a question. One that lingers long after the screen goes dark. How many monsters are walking past us right now, wearing a smile?